Okay, so there's an awful lot to say here. This is one of the most discussed films of the 21st century thus far. In a way, film discourse is downstream of this film. The idea that The Phantom Menace was a phenomenal disappointment and the reasons for it being a disappointment have almost informed people who were relatively young in their 20s when The Phantom Menace came out and younger who, you know, grew up in this environment where The Phantom Menace was considered terrible. And you have to remember, to a lot of young kids, to a lot of us who grew up, I came of age more so with the next two, and as a result, The Phantom Menace did come across as a little bit boring by comparison of all the politics and the Jar Jar Binksing in comparison to all the active entertainment within, well, especially Revenge of the Sith, but also Attack of the Clones, how I felt at that time. Phantom Menace I saw after I'd seen at least notable portions of the original trilogy. So me coming into The Phantom Menace as a kid, there was always something... I always felt a certain impasse to The Phantom Menace, I think because there was so much talking and it wasn't as intuitive or streamlined as certainly the first two Star Wars films. And Return of the Jedi, you can follow Jabba's palace. Jedi's pretty straightforward. I just don't know if there's many memories of watching Jedi when I was that young, like pre-primary school. That fact that The Phantom Menace is a 20th century film it's phenomenal. Like all this technology, this is so impressive. What George Lucas is able to accomplish here technologically is still unbelievable. And here's where the film's first issue arises. What if these Japanese stereotypes, the Neimoidians? Oh no. Now, let me make my thoughts on The Phantom Menace and I suppose the prequels clear. I'm a big fan of the original Star Wars trilogy. You know, I liked the prequels as well growing up. You know, but by the time I was an adult, you know, I preferred the aesthetics of the original trilogy to the PS2 cutscene and I guess... I love the look of The Phantom Menace, but I didn't like the look of Attack of the Clones at this point in time. And even then, there was something... You enjoyed them because they were Star Wars films, but, you know, it was kind of indistinguishable from a PS2 cutscene at that point in time by, like, you know, the 2000s, especially by the time Revenge of the Sith had come out. Technology was moving really fast at this time in the visual effects department. This whole sequence here is really... The mood of the sequence of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan on the ship here, I really like this here. If you didn't know where the rest of the film was going, you'd maybe put off by the Neimoidians, the Japanese stereotypes, but if you were a child and you didn't... That wasn't distracting you, this is phenomenal stuff so far. You'd be so excited, especially seeing that the Vulture droids and the battle droids and just the Neimoidians, these cool, strange-looking aliens, you know, you don't think of them as being kind of ugly stereotypes. This good shot here, them looking out onto the planet. So this is good Star Wars. This is like, oh wow, this is what the Age of the Jedi was like. This is very revealing and good here. But I grew to be quite fond of Revenge of the Sith over time. I do think that film's vision was so ambitious and essentially kind of a pre-Avatar, where live action and animation kind of move together quite seamlessly. A huge improvement over Attack of the Clones. Attack of the Clones suffers from George Lucas being insecure about the response to this film, and so I don't think you got a true vision on Attack of the Clones. Kind of a mishmash of insecurities. Revenge of the Sith, he obviously didn't give a damn and just produced what he wanted, and I think Revenge of the Sith is all the better for it. I love that film. Phantom Menace is very impressive too in its own right. Let's be real, if it weren't for Jar Jar Binks, we'd like this film a hell of a lot more. The other thing I don't care for about the film, the other thing that people bring up a lot, yes, Jake Lloyd, just the fact that a child actor takes up a huge portion of this film's runtime is unfortunate, in my opinion. And frankly, we'll get to it later, but I've never been the biggest fan of the pod race sequence. I don't find it very exciting. I don't know... You would never storyboard a sequence like that, draw together up a comic book series of comic book panels like that. It just seems like a poor understanding of space in the digital era. By space, I mean like not outer space, you understand, just space, period. The most influential piece of film criticism in the 21st century has wound up being Mike Stoklasa, Mr. Plinkett's review of this film, which led to the popularity of Red Letter Media, the most popular film review channel in the world, maybe? We're getting the droidekas soon, which is one of the cooler designs of the Star Wars prequels, I feel. I guess what people like about the Star Wars prequels in retrospect is that these were original designs, like the creator of Star Wars creating or giving the tick of approval to more designs as opposed to a second party trying to find art that seems like it's from the original trilogy, which is the case for Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and the terrible Rise of Skywalker. I've said this before, you may have seen my videos. I'm fond of Force Awakens, actually, overall, and Last Jedi was quite cool as well. I even think Rogue One's a lot of fun in a kind of video game fan art, the kind of playing Swords of Sticks in the backyard sort of way. Yeah, I dig it. There's a sequence where they're coming through. This is fun. Like, this is a fun film thus far. We can't fault it. Jar Jar hasn't shown up yet. It reminds me of an annoying 90s Disney character like Timon and Pumbaa, or, you know, there's really bad ones that came out later in the 90s, like Hercules or Tarzan or Notre Dame. Good shot here. So like seeing the Jedi in action, like prior to their downfall, like right here, this is a great tease of it. And I think right here, the idea of the prequels, this seems like it's going to be a super exciting trilogy so far. Quite a great shot here of Qui-Gon, actually. There's some good cinematography in this. In this one especially, they weren't shooting it on... I think Attack of the Clones is the first film entirely shot on digital. The celluloid here. This Phantom Menace kept the aesthetic of Star Wars in a way that I feel Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith lost it, unfortunately. Now, let's get into the Mr. Plinkett, Mike Class, I think, as I brought it up earlier. Okay, so... Mike Class has started out with these absolutely extraordinary reviews of the Star Trek The Next Generation films. And given that Star Trek and the appeal of Star Trek was that it was a fictional future of our species, spacefaring destiny, and there was a certain internal realism and... internal consistency. There was the logic of the world, the behavior of its characters, the principles of Starfleet, and it was this kind of utopian, beautiful vision, and seeing them try to deal with these clever science fiction problems and these ethical scenarios made for great television at its best. In Star Trek, the original series, The Next Generation, I'm a big fan of Deep Space Nine. I think that's probably the strongest of the Star Trek series. Voyager Enterprise I don't like as much. I quite like Star Trek in general. The films aren't very good. Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock I quite enjoy, especially Wrath of Khan. I think that's an amazing film, obviously. A lot of people do. But the rest of the Star Trek films I'm a bit no on. Especially those J.J. Abrams things. Those were crap. He ought to have just gone straight to Star Wars, frankly. Not Rise of Skywalker, that was crap, but that's besides the point. Anyway, The Phantom Menace... Mike Class, after those 4 Star Trek The Next Generation reviews of Generations, what's the next one called? First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis, moves on to, well, we've got to do The Phantom Menace. And he dissects The Phantom Menace as a screenplay. Now, the screenplay for the original Star Wars film is very tight, compact. It functions as a kind of Flash Gordon space opera. Dialogue is actually quite strong in the film, I feel. Very memorable, quippy, and quotable. It's a great screenplay for what it's worth, the original Star Wars film, and it doesn't leave a lot... It doesn't go too far to kind of fall down. It doesn't Tower of Babel. It had the help of Lawrence Kasdan, and I believe Empire did too, as well as the brilliant Lee Brackett. I think everyone agrees Empire has the strongest script of any Star Wars film. And then we move on to Jedi, which has we can... talk about the dialogue. I mean, everyone knows the Emperor's dialogue is amazing, but other than that, I don't think Jedi's plot structure is kind of terrible. Obviously, they swap up the Han Solo Carbonite plot in the first quarter of the film, and then they've got to go to Endor, and then everything kind of wraps up there in these 3 cutting back between these 3 action sequences. Not a strong screenplay. Like, if you just read Return of the Jedi, you'd be like, wow, this is disappointing. Visually, I haven't made my Return of the Jedi video yet. I think it'd be kind of fun. I thought it'd be kind of fun and interesting to do Phantom Menace before that, just to be I don't know, slightly annoying perhaps. I don't know. Oh no, Jar Jar's rocked up. Speaking of slightly annoying, or actually incredibly annoying, right off the get go. Wasn't one of the early Phantom edits where they just redubbed Jar Jar and the Gungans entirely and had him be about like honor and such? Like they took more seriously the life debt aspect and made it like Jar Jar had a kind of Wookiee-esque debt to Qui-Gon and the Jedi, rather than just this kind of silly comic foil. Yeah, I think George Lucas going out of his way to create a funny comic character for the kids. I think he was a bit out of touch. I mean, trying to appropriate two characters from Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress is one thing, right? And letting Anthony Daniels' performance kind of shine through. Who Anthony Daniels is a very good actor. You see him in BBC Shakespearean productions and things. That's a lot of the reason why a character like C-3PO might work, whereas a character like Jar Jar Binks might not work. I don't know. I mean, no disrespect to the actor, of course. He got a lot of unnecessary abuse over the years, as did Jake Lloyd as well. The actors in these films aren't to blame, really. It's George Lucas was not a great director of actors. He knew this. That's why Irvin Kershner was on Empire, and why Empire has the best acting in Star Wars, that's the consensus, and I'll agree with it, definitely. I quite like Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor's dialogue here. I was going to say two English actors, an English, Scottish actor and an Irish actor. Just good British Isles thespians. That's what Star Wars needs. Apparently, is English actors. Or if the newer films are any evidence of that, Daisy Ridley and John Boyega. I mean that's what people wanted. And sorry, Adam Driver is American, and Oscar Isaac. I don't think he was. Was he born in the United States? Was he born in? I believe he was born in Latin America. Oscar Isaac's a brilliant actor. I really like him in Ex Machina and Dune. I mean, everyone likes Oscar Isaac. And Poe Dameron is one of the probably the most likable of the newer characters introduced in Star Wars. Though Kylo Ren very interesting as well. Yeah, the new films weren't as ambitious as the prequels were, that's for sure. They've tried to play it safe, especially Force Awakens. Narratively, there are some interesting things going on in The Last Jedi, and some subpar things. I really like the Luke Skywalker angle for The Last Jedi. I know a lot of people don't. I think it's, God forbid they make Luke Skywalker an interesting character, right? Rise of Skywalker did really suck, though, and obviously I didn't see Solo. That looked like crap. And we're not even getting into all those dumb TV shows. The first Clone Wars cartoon show was really good. I don't like the second one very much. The one that started with that 2008 feature, which I saw in the cinema, it's not that good. I don't know, Darth Maul's brother and Darth Maul. Yeah, nah. I don't know. That Clone Wars cartoon went a bit too far for me. It's like in universe, the Clone Wars only goes for like 2 years. It's like in MASH where it goes for longer than the Korean War itself. It's a weird comparison, but that's what I just thought of. The Gungan City design here is really cool. There's a lot of comic relief in this film where there wasn't in the original trilogy. And what we have in the 70s is kind of a bummer time. Only so much humor could seep through, and it was, bleak humor. Whereas, Lucas is a rich man at this point in his life, and he's just, hanging out in his lovely Northern California estate, just writing a kids' movie to maintain his wealth. George Lucas is right. He ought to have gotten a Steven Spielberg to filter this through, because I think Steven Spielberg tends to handle... I don't tend to think of Steven Spielberg films as having too much humor being the problem. Too much sentimentality might be the problem. And I don't think Steven Spielberg would necessarily put too much... I mean... I don't know if a problem with a Star Wars film has ever been that it's too sentimental. Some people thought the family focus was a bit too much in the newer films, and that's fair. Especially in Rogue One, which ought to have been way more Dirty Dozen than it was, narratively. Because aesthetically, the things that are fun about Rogue One are all action, kind of, adolescent-oriented kind of indulgence. And so to have this kind of story about Gina Erso and her father is a bit unnecessary in my view. Yeah, man. The reasons people hate this film tend to be screenplay related, whereas, me, I tend to think of storylines in films as being not that important to me, unless it's really good and then it's impressive, or it's really bad to the point of it being distracting. Otherwise, I try to just look at a film as its own thing. Of course, if a film with brilliant direction and cinematography and a lousy screenplay versus a film with brilliant direction, brilliant cinematography, and a brilliant screenplay. Yeah, that film with the which ticks the three boxes is going to be better, but it doesn't. I don't condemn a film for having a. I mean, if it's really distractingly bad, it's really distractingly bad. Is The Phantom Menace distractingly bad? Jar Jar is very annoying, but I'm willing to put up with Willie Scott and Temple of Doom. So I mean, this is more annoying than Willie Scott though. Some people find Short Round really annoying. I don't mind Short Round personally. Is it vaguely racist? Unfortunately, it might be. That sucks. But then again, people have said that about Jar Jar as well. I won't comment on that though, necessarily. Especially because the actor got so much abuse regarding it. It's kind of tasteless just to say that. Oh, the Jar Jar's performance was racist when a lot of the abuse the actor received was probably racially oriented. Anyway, it's disgusting. That's fun. That's a good line delivery from Ewan McGregor. Oh, this sequence is possibly my favorite in the film, other than the Duel of the Fates. I love monsters. I really love sea monsters. This is classic Star Wars, as far as I'm concerned. See, this is like a... Oh, man, this is a really injured masterpiece. This is a wounded classic. Oh, my God. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. The prequels had more ambitious screenplays, you know. This is a big political epic, which has an allegory for sanctions against Iraq, and, you know, it's about... They try to make Padme like a three-dimensional character. It's about Qui-Gon, and he's trying to... wants to train this child against the Jedi Council's judgment. And, you know, it's possibly the most dense screenplay of the Star Wars films thus far. And so, yeah, it kind of Tower of Babels. It becomes so big it falls over. Just in case you don't know about the Tower of Babel. And then Attack of the Clones, I mean, he tries to dumb it down a little bit, but it gets really dumb. The prequels were kind of doomed as screenplays because they had to end a certain way. They had to write all these big action set pieces and then just make sure it ends a certain way. And what happens is they end up, you know, they devise this clone army which is going to become the Stormtroopers. But in the Star Wars canon, they don't end... The Stormtroopers are not all like Jango Fett's. So that was all for nothing anyway. And, you know, it's just so... They do all of this so that the Republic can become the Empire, and they've got to, like, kill all the Jedi overnight and also end that galactic... Yeah, I guess you call it the galactic... Not the Galactic Civil War, the Clone Wars. Yeah, excuse me. The Galactic Civil War is the original trilogy conflict, I suppose. But the Clone Wars is the prequel conflict. And the Clone Wars end overnight. The Jedi, it just wraps up in the one film, in Revenge of the Sith. And if Revenge of the Sith was just the one film, it wouldn't seem as jarring. This is my favourite monster of the four, possibly. Oh, actually, this thing, the one from before, I guess. That's cool as. Can't go wrong with that. Good stuff. 1999. Wow. How does this compare to The Matrix and Toy Story 2, though? Yeah. I might be more of a Matrix fan than a Phantom Menace fan. And definitely a Toy Story 2 fan. I'll say that. Cool shot here is these battleships, battle droid machines are approaching the Naboo city. I can't remember what the capital city this is called. I knew it one time when I was a kid. I knew it was Star Wars lore. It's just, you know, when all you know is Star Wars lore, now there's so much more I know. You gotta keep remembering this nonsense. Good shot here. And a lot of great new music. John Williams contributed so much great music for the prequels, and a lot of it was introduced in this film. Absolutely spectacular. We'll get to it, but one problem I have with this film is the final 4 sequential or concurrent action sequences. Duel of the Fates is amazing, and I'm happy to have it edited back and forth between other sequences, but the other three sequences are all bad. I don't like the Gungan battle on the droid. Nice sequence here. I think that dolls a homage to The Simpsons. I've read that somewhere. It's unfortunate that this is punctuated by like Jar Jar comedy for the kids. It's just like, yeah, but like I don't know. As a kid, I resented when there was like funny things in movies, and then it's like, oh, all certain dumber kids. Oh, I was a prick even then. Certain kids was like, oh, well, I like the funny bit the most, and it's just like, really, you didn't appreciate everything else about the experience? Geez, on your life shallow. I was such a prick of a kid. I didn't say this to anyone. This is just in my head. Elitist little prick. Acknowledging our discontent. You were always an elitist jerk off. But wouldn't there be a huge sea change in film appreciation if we decided that The Phantom Menace had a lot of great qualities to it, rather than it just being bad? Because this whole idea of like The Phantom Menace being a terrible because of its screenplay and certain performances, I suppose, characters, it really lends to this idea that, oh, visuals don't matter, it's all about the story. Yeah, I don't know. I will say Attack of the Clones, both story and aesthetically, I'm not the biggest fan of. That's the one I'm probably going to write off in the prequels, frankly. We're not going to do a video on Attack of the Clones, I don't think. And yeah, the other action sequences at the end of The Phantom Menace, the space battle could be good, but there's just too much Jake Lloyd. Whoa! Crap. As a kid, I didn't want to see, like, kids in... I'd prefer to see adults do cool things in movies than kids, because I knew it wasn't real if it was a kid. And, like, look, this is just me, but, like, I didn't like other kids. Other kids were, like, with dickheads. So, like, you know, I just came across as some kid's power fantasy. Like, I wanted to, you know, watch, like, you know, grown-ups do cool stuff. Because, like, that's, you know, that's who would be doing cool stuff, you know. Kids don't do that sort of things typically. I don't know. I sincerely don't know. I have no idea if I have an internal consistency or not. That's what we're finding out. I remember that music cue really well. See, this is good stuff in this film. One thing people have criticised about these films is how they rely too much on the original trilogy iconography, even here. Because it's like they've got to introduce new characters, they've got to introduce these new characters, quote, new, end quote, but they're not really. So they're like, hey, audience, look, it's R2-D2. Oh, look, it's C-3PO. Oh, look, it's Anakin Skywalker. And it's like, why would R2-D2 and C-3PO even be here? It's just, the chances of that are just too much. Like, you know... And it just goes to show that he's not writing organically so much as trying to get to a certain point in a storyline, and it doesn't weave as well, I feel. It certainly doesn't feel like natural history, frankly. It doesn't feel like a timeline. And when they're doing the Star Trek Discovery prequel stuff, that's even worse. That Star Trek Discovery, there are terminal diseases, which are better than Star Trek Discovery, to be honest. Well, Star Trek in the 21st century in general has been pretty awful. That's just the case, to be honest. And if you deny that, you just see doctors. I've heard it said before that people find it disappointing how, yeah, as I was saying, they've just got to build up these characters, and they know they're iconic characters in the popular culture, and they treat it like that rather than it being an organic, you know, fictional history timeline. I like the idea, like, if we look at Revenge of the Sith as the only prequel, I like the idea that it's this vaguely almost postmodern film which is composing a mythology of our contemporary popular culture, like the backstory, the Romulus and Remus of our contemporary storyline, of our contemporary mythology culture, which in this case is Star Wars. You know, we don't believe in Christianity anymore after the world wars and rock and roll, and so, and you know, going to the moon, and so, you know, Star Wars would do, I suppose. And Revenge of the Sith was like this origin story they put forth. Oh, where did it come from? Here's where Darth Vader came from. And yeah, they tried to make it a big cycle, and Star Wars, big phenomenon again in the 21st century. George Lucas milked all he could out of it before he retired. I guess. Darth Maul. I like the design of Darth Maul. He's the coolest concept for a villain in the prequels, I feel. General Grievous is kind of cool as well, but a bit forced and too scary, video gamey, 90s, but I mean, I dig it. It's kind of in a just kind of gratifying kind of lizard brain sort of way, but I just don't think it's as sleek or organic, natural a concept art. It's just a bit forced, frankly. It's just like made for reactions rather than it just be feeling like a, Darth Maul just seems like he could be an alien in this universe with like an intimidating, adapted, this species adapted to look menacing, whereas Grievous is just like this cyborg who, I like the idea that it's a precursor to the Darth Vader technology, especially in universe, but nevertheless, I still prefer the Darth Maul design overall, as happens. I kind of like the idea of the prequel, but at least if it was just Revenge of the Sith, but all three movies, with all this coincidental in-universe iconography, oh look, it's a Boba Fett thing, oh look, it's oh god, it's everything, isn't it? It's C-3PO, Tusken Raiders, R2-D2, I mean, the Clone Troopers make sense. Even the Clone Troopers, it's just like, oh, where'd the Stormtroopers come from? Well, not the Clone Troopers, really. They just borrowed the armor design, I guess, for some reason. Yeah, the original Star Wars trilogy, that very compact, streamlined Joseph Campbell hero's journey structure, and George Lucas wanted to get more ambitious with this trilogy, but he didn't have a real structure. I would be curious as to see what Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith would have been like if they didn't have the backlash, because maybe this trilogy would have felt more organic that way. Although if it meant more Jar Jar in the next two, which part of me suspects it would have, then I'm very glad that even if it meant Attack of the Clones being as terrible as it is, I don't mind this is the case. Back to Tatooine. Too much of this film was on Tatooine. That's almost a bigger fuck Coruscant. Tatooine is what I have a problem with. Jesus Christ, I'm not looking forward to this. And I wanted to address the fourth action sequence. That's a good shot here. Keep Jar Jar's in it. The fourth action sequence says Duel of the Fates, Gungan battle, the space battle, dogfight, and then there's this boring, tired sequence of Padme and her handmaidens and a group, her security entourage just going through the palace and shooting battle droids. It's just uncharismatic and not great. Even as a kid, we didn't like this. We thought this is so stupid. We didn't relate to this kid. Like oh, kids are gonna think other kids are cool, and it's just like I wasn't like not every kid's an idiot, and like there are a lot of us kids who just didn't want to see other kids in movies. We thought it was dumb. Because when we were kids, we wanted to be into cool, edgy, grown-up stuff. Don't you remember what it was like being a kid? George Lucas in the 50s. Yeah. Sebulba. Hey, here's a great piece of Phantom Menace merchandise, which I happen to be witness to. My friend's father worked at KFC in the 1990s, and when KFC, I guess, had the rights to promote Phantom Menace of the fast food chains in Australia, and so the employees of KFC would have these shirts, and they would have the newer characters of the Star Wars prequels, like Sebulba or Jar Jar Binks, or the kind of C-3PO and his unique design, the kind of without his shell design in this film, and then there would be a question mark, like, who is this character? And if you did on the back of the shirt, the employee would turn around and it would have like the character's name, like Sebulba. The eldest son of that father, he still has that shirt. It's a great piece of history. Oh my god, it's so 1999. It kind of hurts actually. One of the most infamous things which Mr. Plinkett did in the Phantom Menace review was he, I guess, attempted to scientifically prove that the characters in that they introduced in the Phantom Menace are boring because individuals couldn't think of words to describe these characters with that weren't related to what they looked like, what they did, just related to their personality. These individuals his subjects in his case study, the participants in his case study, they could name qualities about Han Solo and C-3PO that didn't have anything to do with what they looked like or what they did in the movie. Han Solo's is brash, courageous, dashing, kind of, he can be potentially stoic and have a disregard for life, although there is principles. There is kind of a shell to Han Solo. So it's easy to describe who Han Solo is, and C-3PO. Those are probably, he's cowardly, bumbling, but he's very brilliant. He's tends to be underestimated. There's a certain smugness about him, but his cowardice leads him to be, as I said, underestimated. And so he tries to do the right thing, and he has a very high standard of himself. And if others are quick to put him down, and critique him, he's also very quick, and he's not hesitant to critique himself when the time comes. And so there is a certain care in C-3PO at the end of the day, whether it's programmed into him or not. So you can name qualities about, the original characters, those two characters in the original trilogy, and they claim that this couldn't apply to Qui-Gon Jinn and Padme Amidala. I'll agree that off the top of my head now, it's difficult to think of qualities for Padme Amidala. Because what's coming to my mind now is she cares for her people, but that's related to what she does. And we only told she cares about her people via dialogue. There's no action in the screenplay. There's no moments of her kind of crying or saying that, being worried that she's not a good leader to her people. She's just stern and brave and powerful, and an example of poor writing of a female character by a male. I'm guessing that this wouldn't have been as bad if Lee Brackett had been around. George Lucas got one of his girlfriends, or I don't know how old his kids were, one of his daughters to help him write this. I don't know. Now, Qui-Gon Jinn, however, there's a bit more to Qui-Gon Jinn than I think some of these characters were. Some of the characters, the participants in the case study were making out. Just to be clear, Jar Jar's humor here is not good. This is this 90s Disney crap here. Anyway, Qui-Gon Jinn is a man who he's absolutely loyal to his masters and the world that he's chosen to be a part of. Well, still, obviously, I have to describe his background here a little bit. Maybe this is defeating the point. Maybe proving to class right here, but here goes anyway. Qui-Gon Jedi are, taken a birth or whatever, and so Qui-Gon decides that he's reigned a Jedi, and Qui-Gon is very respected. He upholds the Jedi tradition. I think what's interesting about Qui-Gon's character is, I think it's cheating to refer to an action he commits in the film, although he insists on training Anakin despite the council. He trusts his own judgment at the end of the day, rather than those. He has an insistence that there's something to this child that the others don't see. I don't know, maybe Qui-Gon ought to have been explored more as a character, and we didn't get the chance to because he died. And maybe there's simply something to be said for the role he plays in the film, his title, him being a Jedi in the film, meaning that he is stoic, and he's forfeited a personality in favor of having a calm, clinical judgment of everything. Trying to describe Qui-Gon Jinn in The Phantom Menace, I don't know, I guess you could just say, I hate to say it just because it's breaking Mr. Plinkett's rule, but he's just an example of a good Jedi. He doesn't let his emotions get in the way. He's just looking at everything logically, perhaps too logically, because whereas the Jedi decide to trust their intuition and their tradition and not train young Force-sensitive Anakin, turns out their intuition's somewhat right. Well, yes and no. It leads to a lot of pain and suffering before it leads to a lot of good when they overthrow Palpatine, but then in the long run, the First Order comes back and 5 planets blow up and the Force Awakens. Maybe it wasn't worth it. Who knows? Maybe this is just this. Maybe that's the depressing tragedy of the Star Wars timeline, is that, the Jedi Council want to prevent the Galactic Civil War from happening and the downfall of the Jedi, but that leads to the downfall of Palpatine, which will eventually lead to the downfall of the rise of the First Order. So there's just Yoda seeing dark times ahead, but he's also seeing hope ahead, and so there's just, you can't win, really, sadly. Eventually Rey destroys the Palpatine forever and Rise of Skywalker, but no one knew that was going to happen until Rian Johnson was kicked from the Star Wars Episode 9 script, and then whoever it was wrote, I guess Abrams wrote Rise of Skywalker instead, which is terrible. Could have been a lot better if Rian Johnson wrote the conclusion to his film, you know, The Last Jedi, but we didn't get to see that. I mean, The Last Jedi had an imperfect script, but I still would have loved to have seen the conclusion to it. I think maybe we would have appreciated some of what we saw in The Last Jedi more so, especially those detractors, if we'd seen where it would end. I don't know. There's no way of knowing at this point now, which is unfortunate. Midi-chlorians is a problem. Yep. Star Wars ought to have been more ethereal and stuff. George Lucas bringing that in, it's dumb. The reason there is a quality to the original trilogy which is lost in the prequels because of the midi-chlorian thing. The midi-chlorians don't need to be there. End of story. Neither do these child actors, actually. This is terrible. Oh, all this Jar Jar humor is just terrible. Don't get me wrong, like, there's lots to admire about this film. Gee, this movie's uncharismatic when it's just Jake Lloyd talking to Liam Neeson. Man, the Senate stuff's better than this. Yeah, some Star Wars movie. Yeah, too much dialogue. I mean, I guess this is the first, like, real text-heavy screenplay which George Lucas wrote. I guess he was showing off how smart he thought he was. He's smart, but I guess I don't think it came through as well as he would have liked it to in this film. He's a very brilliant creator of visual effects and composing these narratives out of them, world building, although I think the narrative he weaved together for this film was a bit uneven, as we know. Even Master Yoda doesn't have a midichlorian count that high. See, that line never ought to have been in Star Wars, in my opinion. I think if one appreciates this film, they could have appreciated it just the same without midichlorians. Isn't that just demonstrative enough that it ought not to have been in the film, perhaps? It just hurts the Star Wars universe. And it does matter, because, yeah, it was a good universe. It was a universe worth preserving with a degree of respect and consistency, I feel. Good shot of Darth Maul emerging in the ship. Good stuff here. Great stuff here, actually. We haven't gotten into what I thought of Coruscant exactly, but I actually like that sequence overall. To be honest, I think it's cool. You know, I like the space politics stuff a little bit. And I kind of like that there's world building of the backstory of the Star Wars and the Jedi Order. That's cool to me. And then the Naboo stuff is maybe 1/4 good, and then there are other 3 sequences I don't like, as I said. It's funny, it's like I came here to actually mount a reimagined defense, a reassessment of the Phantom Menace, to reclaim it for Mike Stacklasa and Red Letter Media. Although, I'm trying to champion this film aesthetically and as a piece of technology, as this amazing accomplishment as a 20th century film. Although, yeah, wow, it is remarkable how much a few narrative misfires can really hurt that shot of Jar Jar just hurt my soul. How much this narrative misfires can just injure the overall experience. Like I said, injured masterpiece, wounded classic here. I'm trying to love this. I really am. And part of me does. Part of me really respects this film, just as a filmmaking accomplishment. Look at these crowds. This is cool. CGI less so, just because it's... Ugh. Concept art is just not that great. This guy's a mask and he's cool as. That snout. That elephant head, that's cool. Yeah, I don't know, like CGI lacks a certain physicality, and so the beings end up being, when they're not droids at least, kind of just floppy and blobby. The CGI droids are great because they kind of have to be, jointed and correspond to physics. They kind of intuitively have to when you're animating them, I suppose. Fun shot here, 3PO holding the flag. unfortunately, it's then just slaughtered by this thing farting. It's disgusting. Why? Unbelievable. Looking at it now, Shimi Skywalker's arc is the most interesting in this film in a way. I'll jab a bit the head off a little creature there. I only spat it out in a gong. See, that was kind of cool. Things like that, like Jabba doing that are cool. But it lacks a certain physicality, it being CGI. Like, there's something... It does make a difference. And it's something that, like, 2D animation gets right, which 3D animation doesn't. You need to... Something happens when you physically throw an object and it hits another object, for example. Oh, this is kind of a bleak humor sequence with the other pod racer, which still blows up, I believe. Anakin is able to get through his issue and flies off. The other one blows up, I believe. Anyway, like, you know, it's like when you throw something at a wall, there's a certain, you know, a certain impact, something, because a certain energy gets released there. And it's hard to demonstrate the energy in the context of digital when I don't know if you're dealing with much energy there, actually. I mean, it's just, you know, they're just pretty pixels. I love pixels, but, you know, I love Avi Ray Smith, although I think you gotta be, you know, Andre and Wally B had more physicality than most pieces of CGI since it. Avatar had great physicality, and obviously the Lord of the Rings trilogy was careful with its physicality because, you know, a lot of that was motion capture or like real locations. You know, Jackson did his compromise and it looks all the better for it. The Lord of the Rings trilogy tends to look more, at least authentic and realised than the Star Wars prequels. Revenge of the Sith is a very impressive accomplishment, that seamlessness of animation, although I still might prefer the Lord of the Rings trilogy, both as individual films and as a piece of world building. I think Revenge of the Sith, there's a lot of cool stuff in there. I think it's true that the Star Wars prequels on paper did more than any films up to that point, and films aren't doing quite as much as the Star Wars prequels did out of fear of getting the same negative reception. One of the few films that has tried to be a big space opera, a couple films have, things like Jupiter Ascending, which didn't work for me, and then a film like Valerian, which Noel Oakeshott championed as well, and did work for me as well. If it doesn't make you feel something, it doesn't make you feel something, you know? You know, I can't decide, you know, how food or drink tastes like in my mouth, you know. This is what it is. Some of the overhead shots are okay, actually. This may be better than I remembered. The direction of this, I mean. This may be closer to the Akira bike sequence than I remember. I guess just all the backgrounds are kind of boring. It's just, I know it's easy, but it's just all desert and like the pod racing. I guess it's just that it's just such a one-note backdrop. Yeah, it's okay. Still, just the set piece at the middle of the film being a pod race is just kind of lame to me. I don't know. It's just me. I just find it quaint. Maybe that's why people like it, but that's the reason I don't. I find it corny. Phantom Menace is kind of doomed by knowing it's going to be the first one as well, so it just does like little like setup things, and it's going to be like, oh, and they're going to get the real big stuff in the next two. I mean, the lightsaber duels is as cool as anything else, but like, just like, if this is going to be like, if this is like going to be the only Star Wars prequel, like, if you thought this is going to be the only film you were going to make of these three, you wouldn't have put a pod race in the middle of them. I think this film is limited in and of itself in a respect by having to be the first one, as well as having to do prequels and like end at a certain point, and it's like, fuck it, you would have just been better off with Star Wars sequels, just so you wouldn't have to worry about the technology it not seeming as different, you know, like these universes don't. Phantom Menace could match with the original trilogy, but Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith do not feel like the same universe. Like, how can you feel that way? That's just ridiculous. And maybe an appreciation of the Star Wars prequels is not necessarily dependent on them being consistent as like a world or whatever storyline. I think George Lucas is inspired by like Ben-Hur here. Weird thing to be inspired by, but you know, I guess whatever. And this music cue here is great. Do, 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 do. I think that was introduced for the prequels. Great stuff. Do, do, do. Great stuff. Well, these animations on the pod race are cool. The screen images are cool. And even just the mechanics of him switching around, like it's fun. Like there's a certain cleverness here, which is hard not to admire. And just like yeah, it's it was sound design, always syncing up. It's pretty cool when it's working. I'm guessing the sequence isn't going to go for as long as I once remember it going for, because I think it's going to wrap up pretty soon. It's Anakin and Sebulba at this point. Oh, Jar Jar, don't be in the movie. Sorry to keep saying that. I know we all feel that way. Like, if that was in my movie, I'd hit myself. I'm only judging these films by how I'd feel if they were my work, by the way. I'm either jealous of a film or I'm not, you know what I mean? That's the thing. The cutting between physical props and CGI is actually quite seamless here. Very impressive. Those two-headed things are still annoying me, though. And just looking at Jar Jar too. And yeah, the less comedy, the better. I mean, you don't have to be depressing. You can be lighthearted, but don't, like, go out of your way to insert humor. Just let it naturally come about. I mean, inserting jokes like they're, breath, like breathers. It just doesn't seem very organic to me. Because there's humor in the original trilogy, but like it's kind of weaved into the plot. It's not like there's no or like there's not like it doesn't feel like sitcom moments in the way that even The Force Awakens does at times. Rogue One was great and that it relegated all its humor to one character. So like the new films actually got this, or at least one of the new films got this right, Rogue One. Last Jedi, I don't remember the humor being too much of an issue by comparison to at least The Force Awakens, which is very creepy in a kind of Joss Whedon Avengers sort of way, which, yeah, I mean, works for a Marvel Comics film, of course. Jack Kirby, of course, that vibe works there, but I think for Star Wars, I don't think it's as appropriate. But I still really like The Force Awakens overall. Where are we assessing... I'm talking about these problems with The Phantom Menace, but where are we assessing it in comparison to the newer Star Wars films? I like Revenge of the Sith more than the newer Star Wars films, and maybe even I like Revenge of the Sith more than Return of the Jedi. You know what? Look, I'll say this. I wasn't talking about Return of the Jedi before, but I'm going to now. If I'm okay with Return of the Jedi, I'm definitely okay with Revenge of the Sith, and you know what? I'm okay for The Phantom Menace as well. Attack of the Clones I struggle with, but there's so much artistic choices in that film I don't like. I don't like the design of the Camino planet. What a lazy interior. What a cool exterior of a world with the laziest interior. What is that? That's terrible. If you showed me that as a concept art, I'd just be like, gee, can we get something else? Can we get Mobius instead? Like, what's that? It's crap. Camino's the ocean stuff's great. I love anything that's got sea monsters is a plus for me. But the interior of just all of the clone troopers and then Jango Fett, and he's just like hanging out in a little apartment in Camino. It's just corny. We got a great sequence coming up where Darth Maul attacks them. I love this sequence. This is so like tense. Oh, but before that, we're getting a really emotional sequence and proof that I think Shmi Skywalker's arc is the most interesting in this film. And I guess to some respects, I like how it closes in Attack of the Clones. The other thing, I hate the Geonosis backdrop in Attack of the Clones. Just lazy rocks everywhere. That arena battle's a mess. The Obi-Wan versus Dooku's kind of cool. Yoda shrieking as he like flips everywhere is kind of lame and out of his character. And I don't like Christopher Lee's performance as Count Dooku as much as I like. It seems to work for me a little bit in Revenge of the Sith, but I prefer him as Saruman in Lord of the Rings, as we all do, I would suppose. Shimi, her performance is really good in this film, actually. Like, I mean, it's... Yeah, no, it does feel like she seems like a real person, like Shimi, which is one of the few characters in Star Wars we can say. I guess you could say that about Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. Well, Han Solo at least felt like a kind of a movie, kind of Western archetype at least. Oh yeah, Shimi. Yeah, good work. I don't know this actress's name, but she's very good, I must say. Like she does seem like a real person, and I think that's why like some would be hesitant to like praise her performance because like when you're a kid it's just like or a teenager she just seems like a lame mum or a square, but when you're an adult you're like you lose your hubris a little bit and you're just like actually this is the most real and brilliant beautiful performance in the film, maybe in Star Wars in a way. It's really strong. Actually, I think Jake Lloyd's performance is kind of working here because like it's easy to get a kid to convey these sorts of emotions, Easy somehow it's easier to like what if you were like having to take it taken away from your mom, and it's easy to him to convey that in respect here. The dialogue could be better, I suppose, but this is moving. And the fact that it is a prequel, it is kind of interesting, the idea that, like, this kid is Darth Vader. Oh, this is really moving when he goes to hug her for the last time. This is good stuff. See, there was a great poster of this film with little Anakin and Jake Lloyd's shadow being Darth Vader against the kind of a wall there in Tatooine. Yeah, good sequence. Like, this... From when Anakin has to say goodbye to Shimi in the previous scene, up to, like, most of Coruscant... The film's going to be really good from this point on, up to maybe some Jar Jar stuff. Very strong stuff. This film has been underrated. This film has been very, very underrated. And I think the fact that Attack of the Clones sucked so much... Phantom Menace's problems was very, very jarring, especially compared to the older Star Wars films. I mean, yeah, let's be honest, Jedi has its problems with the Ewoks and all that. But... so we could forgive the Phantom Menace, but it's just that Attack of the Clones sucked so bad that it made the Phantom Menace seem worse by comparison, when actually, if Attack of the Clones didn't suck so bad, we could look at the Phantom Menace eventually as, like, a film that mostly worked. 75% was brilliant. And, look, if I have my feelings about The Last Jedi as well, I can't condemn this film. It's just not in me. I just don't feel it. As a kid, I thought the politics stuff was kind of boring, but of course, I wanted to watch... I liked the original trilogy, And this was jarring for me, even as a kid. I saw the original trilogy first even then, because that's what we could tape off of the television, rather than have to buy a VHS for or a movie ticket for, Oh, this Darth Maul, this cool stuff here. I'm young, I remember, I'm young enough, or old enough... I remember a time when there were Phantom Menace merchandise everywhere, and people had like Darth Maul backpacks and stuff. Whoa, this is great here. Just seeing a Jedi and a Sith fight for like the first time in, like, chronologically, like this is the backstory of this, like the era of the Jedi and the Sith, although they thought the Sith were all disappeared, and Qui-Gon's like, what's going on? But he like reacts anyway, and he's just in the moment, he knows what to do. Good stuff. Well edited sequence there, and then there's a shot of it like from the ship here. Over there. Yeah, that's cool as. That's what it looks like. It's like being part of the universe. It's like, well, what the heck's that? It's seeing a lightsaber battle in the distance. It's cool. This is good. Jump. Darth Maul there. Annoyed. We only one blade so far. The twin blade. It's revealed later. But if you saw the trailer, it's pretty sure it's in there. The introduction of Obi-Wan and Anakin. This is nice. I like they reveal how, like, Qui-Gon kind of saying, I think he was after the Queen, but actually, I think he's, like, kind of lying to Anakin there. Or maybe he doesn't realise it, that Darth Maul, he doesn't know he's Darth Maul, like, he's looking for Anakin, boy, if the midichlorian count. Ugh. I can't believe I said that out loud, but I had to. Oh, the Naboo Palace. Oh, it's Sio Bivol. I remember his name. Oh, Spider Chair of Newt Gunray. I remember his name too. How fun. Yeah, I love that Terrence Stamp is in a Star Wars film as the Chancellor Valorum. George Lucas, I'm gonna get Terrence Stamp from the Star Wars film. What are you gonna do with Terrence Stamp? I'm gonna have him just sit in the podium and talk. And Ian McDiarmid, always... People have pointed out Ian McDiarmid as the finest actor in the prequels. He does a brilliant job in Return of the Jedi and does a brilliant job in the prequels. That's for certain. I like he's wordless act. When he's not delivering lines, he can be a really good actor, Jake Lloyd, I must say. I think we have given this film a hard time. I never hated this film. As a kid, I thought it was the boring one, just because of all this politics and Tatooine pod race stuff. As an adult, I can appreciate it more as a piece of filmmaking. And, I mean, it's true there's many moments where this film doesn't work, and you're like, how can a film be worthwhile when it's got certain bad scenes in it? But, like, who cares? Like, we can choose to ignore things in films if the rest of the film work. You know, I look at something like The Phantom Menace, and I'm imagining if it was my Star Wars film or a film I directed, and I'm thinking, gee, I love some of the look at this costume Padme's wearing here, brilliant. I wish I didn't have Jar Jar in the film. Well, like, redubbed it. It's not even a good design for a character, this kind of cartoon rabbit thing. Like, what's it meant to appeal to? It's just strange. Like, this is a time where a focus group may have helped the film. I mean, George Lucas having absolute creative control. Like, Jar Jar Binks is, like, the most auteur decision in the history of filmmaking, especially on, like, the most expensive film ever made, as I'm sure this was. Maybe Titanic was more expensive than this, actually, but, I mean, what the hell? But so, like, this sequence is good. Padme and Natalie Portman and Ian McDiarmid, this dialogue sequence is great. I couldn't have appreciated this as a young person. And, like, adults who would appreciate this don't appreciate Star Wars. It's kind of tragic. Oh, man. Like, this is just Jedi Council stuff at its best in this film, also. Yoda's puppet looks... Oh, this is the cut of the Phantom Menace with a CGI Yoda. Okay, I haven't seen this before. I mean, I know of this, but I never actually watched the Phantom Menace with a CGI Yoda in it. Oh, that's fun. I want Papa Yoda. I want the Papa Yoda who looks worse than he did in the original films. That's what I want. That's so fun to me. Oh, it's Yaddle! Love Yaddle! Yaddle's so cool. I used to know some of these names. Plo Koon. I don't think Kit Fisto's here yet. Sassy Kin, Kiadi Mundi, obviously Mace Windu, Samuel L. Jackson's iconic, memorable character. The guy with the long neck, he dies in between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. I know that much about the EU. I don't know who the chap with the beard is. I can't remember the chap with the horns names. He dies in Order 66 in Revenge of the Sith. Yeah, there's interesting stuff. I mean, obviously... There is an impasse here. Those who were into the films because they were very, it was like Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and Princess Leia, they talked like real kind of 70s young people. Yeah, and then Alec Guinness was the one delivering this dialogue like he was this old hippie, but he was trying to like get them to understand it. And then this film, it throws you straight into the backstory and the lore. And I've heard people say that they love that. They treat this as kind of a... If the original trilogy was like The Hobbit or even The Lord of the Rings, then the prequels is like kind of a Silmarillion situation. And I love the Silmarillion. The Silmarillion to me is the most rich and interesting of the Tolkien text. Like, don't get me wrong, I adore the Silmarillion. But a part of me wishes that some of this stuff is brilliantly realized in certain anime I've seen, like Legend of the Galactic Heroes or the UC Universal Century Gundam mythos. I feel like that's a better structure to explore this sort of like dense world building. This is a good shot here. I've always appreciated this. It's good, completely digital as well, completely CGI. Oh, the Senate. This is interesting stuff, actually, I will say. And the way it builds into the action sequence in Revenge of the Sith is genius. Let's admit that. There's ETs on one of these pods, I believe. I've seen that in a clip. A little cute cameo there. I like that. But, no, yeah, some of these animes done it really well, and I wish the prequels had more time to do this. But again, when you're building a backstory to something that's already existed, remember, first think of Gundam. The origin is just terrible. It's not that it builds too much in terms of mech and stuff, but like it establishes so much more to Char's character than was necessary. It's like, oh, Char and Garma were actually really good friends. And it's just like, No, Char had just a professional stoic relationship with Garma, and then when the time came, Garma thought that Char didn't think anything of him. That was kind of what was interesting about it. And then when he betrayed him, he's like, Char? Char? And then Char's going, don't take it personally, Garma. It's just, don't blame yourself. Blame your family. And then Garma's confused. He's like, what? But it's kind of the tragedy of it. Garma's last moments are absolute confusion. You know, it's and he has no idea. Char, like, my family, like, what did my family do to you, Char? What? Huh? Because we don't know yet. Later on, the siblings figure it out, and it leads to like that tension when Gama's sister is on Kaisel. What's her name? She's like, I know you killed Gama, Char, and there's just kind of that tension. That's Mobile Suit Gundam's amazing, and culminating with the rocket launcher. UC Gundam's awesome. I think I almost prefer UC Gundam to the Star Wars at this point, but I still like Star Wars a lot. Just getting goofy, elastic, kind of sword and sorcery space opera thing. But UC Gundam's like the best military fiction ever. It's like move over Starship Troopers and Heinlein. Like this is where it's at. Asimov's Foundation's kind of interesting, but I've not read it extensively as of this point in my life. Maybe one day I ought to. Yeah, the Twi'leks. People complain about the Senate stuff. It's like literally just this one scene, I'm pretty sure. Hey, they're the ETs! Hey, look at them. Order! We shall have order! Oh yeah, and you know what? This conspiracy plot is so poorly weaved into the series. I mean, it's such a just because we have to the conspiracy, like any conspiracy theory that people claim to be going on, it has to be, and that it works. It has to be so successful and so elaborate to the point where you're like, gee, that's really contrived, and like, how did like that not fall the fuck apart? It's like, oh, he was clouding their minds, and he was like, I'm going to infiltrate, and that's a good shot. I'm going to become the Chancellor of the Senate. And it's like, then I'm going to reveal myself and be like, oh, I was a Dark Lord of the Sith the whole time. It's like Zorn revealing himself as Magneto in Grant Morrison's X-Men. It's just silly. It's like, it's like, it ought to have been like more of an elaborate conspiracy that like people were like, there were like whistleblowers that like Palpatine was killing, you know what I mean? Or like they didn't realize that they were supporting this. It's all just so elaborate, and just to get to the point where the original trilogy happens and they just wipe it all up, just to get to that like end point. It doesn't feel like a cohesive history. And if you were writing a beginning, middle, and an end, and it was going to begin with the Phantom Menace and end with Return of the Jedi, it wouldn't have gone that way. You wouldn't have written it as, oh, and secretly the Dark Lord of the Sith is Palpatine and blah, blah, blah. It's just like, it's just an odd writing decision. Maybe I should report it for its audacity, and then how crazy it is when, like, the Chancellor, it's like, I was the Dark Lord of the Sith. Because I like the Zorn Magneto thing. You know, I think that's just crazy. I don't like it. It's not good, but it's just silly. And Grant Morrison was just probably tripping too much at the time, which, you know, hey, you know trip away, brother, right? But, like, I wonder if George Lucas was as exciting. It's an interesting idea, but it's just too much like, oh, this needs to be this because of these reasons, not for anything truly organic or because it's intuitive, or maybe the unintuitiveness of it is what's brilliant about it. I don't know. The prequels are such a strange phenomenon. They exist in such a vacuum which you wouldn't have come up with them in another context. Like, they only are what they are because you think about them. George Lucas has to think of them. It's like, right, I need to, I've got certain limitations. It has to, take place in this time period and get to the point where the original movies happened. But I want to experiment with new technology and do whatever I want. So, look at this. Oh, wait, no, it has to fit into that continuity. Boop, 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 boop. There you go. They just seem kind of odd, There's just something about them which doesn't feel as natural, or it's not like they don't have the majesty that George Lucas had when he composed the original trilogy. Just he sees everything around him and then he weaves these things together, and there's no limitations on them. The limitations on the prequels were the fact that they were set before. They should have been set after or way before. I know he wanted to tell the backstory, and especially like once in Empire he revealed that Darth Vader was Luke's father. He wanted to have the whole like, oh, I want to have a sequence where Obi-Wan and Darth Vader are fighting next to a volcano and all this stuff. He had all these ideas, but I think he ought to have been very careful, because this is before the internet and people were complaining about everything and poking holes in everything. You know, now when you do a prequel, you better make sure that it's seamless. You know what I mean? Write the prequel as though you wrote it before the original work. You know what I mean? I mean, hey, maybe if you've improved as a writer, and that's great, and you can maybe it could be a better piece of writing and as an individual text than what was written first, even though it's said afterward. Hey, whatever. But at the same time, you've got to make sure that the event's coherent. It doesn't just seem like, oh, that's there because the things that happened chronologically later, but they were released first, were popular, so I've got to... And it just doesn't feel like an organic history. Characters in the Star Wars prequels are significant characters in the original trilogy. In a way, the only characters that should have carried over is like Obi-Wan and Yoda and Anakin. You know, that everything else is like having 3PO and R2-D2 in it, having this Jango Fett and clone troopers. It just seems dumb to me, having so much mythology, and then you add so much mythology and you have to just like sweep it all up before the next movie comes up, you know, just like to, oh, this is where it all came from. There's a certain genius to it, and that like it's just so whack and you never would have thought of it otherwise, and it's just so unintuitive and odd, but there's also just it's not organic. You never want to be too conservative and orthodox in like composing art, but I guess you don't want to be too crazy either and just do whatever your first impulse is. I guess every piece of art sometimes needs a few morning afters until you're finally like 101% okay with what you've done as an artist, let's say. Don't get hung up on like an orthodox, like it's got to be this. Just, it sounds stupid, but that's my advice as an amateur filmmaker. Whatever. Post-NAS is back. This set is great, by the way, with all the heads, the statues in Naboo Forest here. I wish Boss Nass wasn't such a kind of a comedic character in tone. I think it's kind of too much of an attempt at a kid's cartoon character rather than like a kind of organically woven character like the original Star Wars characters feel like. There's no pandering in the original Star Wars trilogy. It's just George Lucas being like... The original Star Wars film was like, George Lucas is going, fuck it. This is the last movie I'm ever going to make, and it's going to be everything I want in this movie, everything I've ever loved. And it's Star Wars. And then Empire, he was going to like do this, he was going to top it, and he did. And then Jedi, he was, you know, his real life was going a bit wrong, and so he was like, fuck it, let's just wrap it all up in one movie and end it. Oh, look at that shot, that's good. So Jedi suffers a bit from that, but it's still a good Star Wars film in many respects, in my opinion. And The Phantom Menace has its problems, but you know what? Maybe it's not much worse, or maybe it's even slightly better than Return of the Jedi. And I think I ultimately prefer Return of the Jedi. But I think Revenge of the Sith is better than Return of the Jedi if I had to choose one, to be frank. But really all I'm saying is let's appreciate films as films and imagine what The Phantom Menace would be like if Jar Jar wasn't there. Because even Mike's DeClasa, I think if Jar Jar wasn't there and it was distracting you, because like, it's so like out of place that it makes you think that see things wrong in everything. And there are problems, and to be fair to Mike DeClasa, he's not the biggest Return of the Jedi fan. He said that before, although he didn't. I don't know how clear he's made it, because I think some people would be like, "Oh, how come you shit on the Phantom Menace and the Star Wars prequels? Well, the originals aren't that well written. Look at Return of the Jedi," and he agrees. I agree. Return of the Jedi is a kind of abysmal script, but you know, love a lot of what's going on in that film visually and aesthetically. The world building, Ewoks suck, but you know. There's a lot to love in Jedi. Music, puppets on the Jabba's palace, the space battle above Endor is the best dogfight in Star Wars history, more or less. And this shot of them coming out of the woods, how good is this? How good is this? Oh, man. There's some good stuff in this film. I don't dislike the Gungan design. I guess it's just more the other Gungans, I kind of don't mind their designs. It's the pink kind of fluffy plush bunny nature of Jar Jar, and I love their big lizards. Like, this is cool as like those big cows on them. Yeah, there's some good designs in this trilogy. Which I guess, again, I love George Lucas approving new designs and like expanding the universe rather than like kind of looking insular and inward as the sequel trilogy had, for better or for worse. I think, look, I was happy just to get an original Star Wars film again for The Force Awakens after what we got in, you know, Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith didn't have the same aesthetic. This has the aesthetic of the original trilogy, Phantom Menace, for the most part. It's just Jar Jar's just... Jar Jar was that annoying that I think it really just hurt our perception of the film. And then sneaking in through Naboo, it's kind of cute. Again, like, it was held back by, like... The original Star Wars wasn't thinking, like, alright, there's got to be two more, so don't hold... So, you know, restrain ourselves a bit. This film is restraining itself a bit, not just because of technology, but because it knows that there's got to be two more films worth of set pieces, so it can be a bit modest and, like, you know, just play it a bit, you know, low-key here. But when you're watching it, but there's no reason to watch it again, and then there's... It just seems meager, and it just seems like you had no ideas. You know, like, there are ways of... Surely, you know, you're an imaginative guy, Lucas. You can think of, like, ways to make... I mean, that's the problem with prequels. If I was composing a Star Wars prequel, I'd try to have set pieces that were just, you know, war battles that didn't... Major battles of the Clone Wars that don't necessarily have consequence, or at least, you know, aren't contentious with what happens in the original trilogy. You know, technologically or, you know, narratively, there's only so much, like, I mean, like, all these huge battles happen in the original Star Wars trilogy, and it's like, none of this is, like, I mean, it doesn't have to be mentioned in the original trilogy. It's just... It just seems a little bit like, oh, I guess, like, warfare, like, just calmed down a bit after 20 years. You know, the technology kind of stopped... They just stopped using certain technology, I guess. Not even just in the battle droids, but there's a certain fluidity to the dogfights in the prequels which isn't existent in the originals, and so... I know it doesn't really matter, but it's slightly jarring. Like, you want to watch the films from, you know, chronological order, it doesn't really work. This film could have. I think the next two went a bit far in their, especially Attack of the Clones, well, both of them, like, yeah, too much fluidity. There's a certain grounded live action rigidity which was bound to Star Wars' original trilogy, and bound to Phantom Menace more so than Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith do, but it does make clones and Sith feel out of place in the trilogy. And The Force Awakens worked very hard to keep the original trilogy's physicality. Last Jedi did as well, but there was a lot of CGI, especially, like, there were sequences of Last Jedi which didn't feel like it was trying nearly as hard as The Force Awakens had to adhere to the original trilogy aesthetic. I think Last Jedi, maybe Rian Johnson saw himself as appropriating the aesthetic of the entire 6 films, because I think he actually likes the prequels. He's been vocal about enjoying the prequels and some of what was in there, whereas J. Abrams hasn't said anything about the prequels, which is to say I don't think he likes them very much, and just doesn't want to say it because it wouldn't be very professional or, you know, good thing for the director of Episode 7 to say that about the franchise they've asked him to inherit, you know. A bit disrespectful, I would imagine, a tiny bit. There's comedy stuff. People have compared this to, like, oh, it's brilliant, it's like Drunken Master. It's just like, you're looking for excuses at this point. If you respect this film, you have to admit that they could have taken some things out to make this film an, like, undeniable masterpiece. Like, I mean, you could have edited this film, you could have changed some things about this film, and anyone who denied it was a masterpiece would be a fool. Because it has this sequence. I used to replay this moment as a kid. I thought it was so cool. Like, this is what... If there was just one Star Wars prequel, you could have had the Duel of the Fates as, like, the opening scene. Wouldn't that just be the coolest way to open a Star Wars prequel ever? It's like a long time ago, galaxy far, far away. And then you have, like, this space battle going on. And then meanwhile, in the palace... and you're like, holy shit, what's going on? And it's just in the middle of this like lightsaber battle between Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Darth Maul. That would have been the coolest thing in the world. Like, it already is. Look at this go. Yeah, as a kid in 1999, you would have been floored by that. Oh no, and he accidentally does everything. He doesn't even do it on purpose. It's so bad. Oh, it's so bad. Oh, this is so tonally jarring. It's like a Michael Bay or Roland Emmerich film at this point. Maybe that's the problem. Like, George Lucas was thinking, taking trends of the modern blockbusters as those by Michael Bay, like Armageddon, or Roland Emmerich's Independence Day, or Stargate, or God forbid, Godzilla '98. I mean, all three of those films are terrible, but Godzilla in particular, just a brutalization of a classic series and all that. Oh, this is good. Guys, listen to this. There's the Force finger, opens that. Oh, this is classic. Yeah, you could have had Revenge of the Sith as the only prequel, and then you could have even had this as like the opening, like a kind of, not that a Star Wars film wouldn't do like a kind of a flashback and then cut to the main story, but this would be an amazing way of doing it, like Obi-Wan's origin story of why he's Anakin's master, because Qui-Gon was going to be Anakin's master, but then he died, and so Obi-Wan has this kind of resentment perhaps toward Anakin as a result, and then they have their uneasy relationship and falling out in Revenge of the Sith, you know. But yeah, as I said, you can't really have a Star Wars film, or maybe, unless you want to make this one big Star Wars prequel. Artistically, that might have been an awesome idea, but it wouldn't have made as much money. It would have been a cyclical, you know, have a trilogy where they're all, it's like one story. But it doesn't feel like a cycle as much, because, you know, Phantom Menace takes place quite a bit before Attack of the Clones. In Attack of the Clones, there's 2 years in between them, but a lot happens. Like, Obi-Wan and Anakin's relationship completely changes. Like, they're bitter at each other in Attack of the Clones, and they're just good friends and brothers in the third film. And you see the relationship change during, like, the Clone Wars cartoon a bit. Like, at least that's the way I felt as a kid, was that, oh, that's where you see their relationship change. And I didn't see it as a bad thing, because it was just all Star Wars, and I thought it was all meant to tie it in together. It was, actually. It's kind of lazy that, like, they don't let individual films do this, and they rather just have, oh, to understand it, you've got to read the tie-in novels. Don't do that nonsense. I was a bit confused. When The Force Awakens came out and I saw it in the cinema, I was a bit like, okay, so, like, what's the situation here? Like, there's a Republic and a First Order. Like, where'd the First Order come from? What's the backstory? It didn't explain this very significantly, to my memory, in the opening crawl. And so I was like, well, what's going on exactly? Like, why is Leia in the Resistance? Like, why is it the Resistance? Why isn't the Republic just fighting the First Order / Neo Empire? Why do they have to form a new Resistance? It's not like the First Order have won yet. They were the Rebel Alliance because the Galactic Empire was the dominant power, and they were rebelling against it. Being the Resistance against the First Order, which was, I guess, the second fiddle to the Republic, like, that's just weird. Like, you have to form a resistance at the First Order's just being a bureaucratic, nothing kind of United Nations thing, and so, like, Leia's got to form the resistance offshoot of the Republic to fight the First Order. It just didn't make much sense to me, and apparently it's explained in a novel which I'm never going to read. I just won't. Not many other people have read it either, I imagine. So, they've watched a YouTube video which explains it. And that person probably just read Wikipedia or Wikipedia anyway, so, you know, it doesn't really matter at the end either. Oh, look, this is a tense sequence where they use their beams. Like, this is their idea of tension. This is lame. George Lucas, he could have thought of something better than this, but you had to keep it modest in the first of the trilogy. You didn't think of Star Wars as the first of a trilogy in 77, like... Oh, no, don't get... not that he was just being orthodox. I think... Here's the thing. George Lucas was doing whatever he wanted in the original trilogy, and then he got a bit cynical in Jedi, obviously. I think he was, like, second-guessing himself a bit too much on the prequels, especially on Attack of the Clones. I think you get the unadulterated George Lucas vision on Revenge of the Sith, and you get some of it here. I think some of it's what he wants, you know, because he knows kids will like anything, but then he's also making sure, to make sure kids will like it for sure, he puts in stuff like Jar Jar Binks. Maybe he was so insecure about the politics and some of the kind of more adult stuff like this sequence. Look at this, how well is this sequence directed? This is insane! This is insane! This is a piece of filmmaking. This is fucking glorious. Holy fuck. Look at this. Star Wars didn't get much better than this sequence. And the sequence where they're waiting behind the lasers. I mean, it's such a forced, contrived... But apparently, according to some backstory, and I think George Lucas may have intended this, this is like an old Sith temple or something. This is meant to keep, like, Dark Lord, like, dark spirits out. Like, this, like, laser thing here. Like, legitimately. That's, I think, something George Lucas thought of and decided that asked an author to elaborate upon in the Phantom Menace tie-in novel, rather. Which is interesting. And just a kind of, like, a galactic cycle coincidence that it kind of... This, like, conflict between the Jedi and the Sith kind of comes back to this temple. Just out of just, like, the cosmic novelty of things. Oh, the shield breaks and those big reptiles don't know what's going on. Still recording? We are. Got 19 minutes of movie left. I hate this sequence so much. These Gungans and nonsense. Ugh. Jar Jar looks worse in high definition. Did they CG him again sometimes? I think they have. Oh my god. Like, George Lucas even edited the prequels. Like, of course he did. The Yoda thing we mentioned before, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, Jar Jar got some redoing as well. More freckles or more detail to the eyeballs. Maybe CGI'd Wicket's eyes for Return of the Jedi, the newest one of those. Update. I think it was like the early 2010s he did those last. Maybe he's done them again since then, I'm not certain. By the way, that's awful, by the way, him doing those. Not him doing those again, but, like, making the originals, like, unavailable. Because it does make a difference. This is so dumb. He had to write he just had to get to an end. He didn't want to write this. He's just like, alright, I need to fill gaps here. God, this sucks. This film, yeah, wounded masterpiece. Injured classic, or whatever I was saying before. That still applies. Because Qui-Gon's death before was beautiful. Like, that Duel of the Fate scenes are just brilliant. Like, it couldn't be better. Like, it's seriously, this is peak cinema in a way. Yeah, I said that. I don't care. What? Yeah. Ooh, look at this. Yeah, Obi-Wan, he's a bit violent. Darth Maul, he's ready to kill. Not afraid at all. Obi-Wan, as brave as he's ever been. Most trying and, like, testing moment of his life. Like, just this being young Obi-Wan is, like, just awesome, you know what I mean? Like, this being Obi-Wan's backstory is really exciting. This is where the prequels kind of work. Like, where, like, you really believe that this is young Alec Guinness. Like, this was his exploits as a young man. Like, it's just exciting to think that. Like, it sucks that this... Because this works so well sometimes, and then when it doesn't work, it doesn't work. The idea of the Trade Federation being villains, it's very interesting, but it's very much, you know... It's such deep world building that most kids didn't understand what a trade federation was, what a blockade was, what sanction, you know, any of that. I think some adults may have seen it as sanctions, but the guys who would didn't care about Star Wars all that much, I think. Maybe George Lucas wanted them to, but it was an uphill battle. Especially when Jar Jar Binks was in the film, you know? Yeah, the kind of weird Eastern Oriental designs of Padme's costumes. I like them, but some people find them very un-Star Wars. But look, our planet in the Star Wars universe can have that design and that culture and that... Like, whatever. It doesn't make it un-Star Wars. It's like, whatever. Like, Star Wars doesn't just have to look like 70s fashion after a while, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Maybe in the dilapidated times of the Empire, you know, all there was is just like, you know, discount 70s clothing... Whatever. You know. There you go. Only a few scenes after this. There's Qui-Gon's funeral, and then there's the celebration on Naboo, which is kind of a parallel to the celebration scene at the end of the first Star Wars film. Written and directed by George Lucas. That's one of the odder final shots of a Star Wars film. Boss Nass holding up... The great memorable character of Boss Nass holding up his reward, like, you know, beam, orb, or whatever that is. Anyway, there is about 6 minutes of credits, exactly. Nice. Yeah, David Tattersall. I think they had a different cinematographer on this one than the next two did, which is why it looks better, because it's shot on celluloid mostly, half celluloid as opposed to digital, for Attack of the Clones and then Revenge of the Sith definitely being entirely digital. Well, you know, I guess that's the end of the commentary. I mean, I'm just gonna... these credits do their thing... If there's anything else to say here, I'll just wrap up all the rest of my thoughts. Well, I've still got time at least. Before I have to get out of here. Okay. It is a brilliant film, all in all. Fuck it. Let's choose to ignore Jar Jar and just accept this film as a brilliant space opera. And if we're going to ignore Ewoks in Return of the Jedi, let's just end the whole... And the sister fucking thing in Return of the Jedi was weird. You know, Luke and Leia being sisters was dumb there. And, you know, if I'm going to ignore some of the dummy stuff in the new films and in the original trilogy, in the case of Return of the Jedi, yeah, and Revenge of the Sith, I'm all on board with... I'm okay with The Phantom Menace. Fuck it. This is a quality film and I don't even care anymore. I apologise for everything Noel Oak shot. This is a classic. I don't even care anymore. Fuck it, man. It's got its problems, but I choose to ignore them, as I said. I'll do so. Anyway. But the real question is, will we ever revisit Attack of the Clones? And the answer to that... Yeah, Attack of the Clones tried too hard, too forced. The Anakin and Padme stuff is worse than anything in The Phantom Menace. And the action sequences are forced and dumb. The Camino thing I complained about, the Geonosis thing I complained about, the Coruscant thing is forced and tried. It's a mess and I don't care for it. Wish I did. But I have to be honest about how I feel. Very unstable and kind of loose and kind of shaky Attack of the Clones digital effects, you know, they're very, oh man, they're just like kind of wobbly, you know, it's just kind of pathetic in a way. Rise of Skywalker, I'm not that keen on either, but still. If I were to rank the Star Wars films, and I'm going to include a couple of other, well, I haven't seen Solo, A Star Wars Story, but I'm just going to assume that I would put that at the bottom if I had seen it, so I'm going to put it at the bottom of this list. And I'm going to have to put Star Wars The Clone Wars from 2008 on par or above that. Next, unfortunately, now, Attack of the Clones versus The Rise of Skywalker. Insofar as the focus in Attack of the Clones is Anakin and Padme and in just the Force Star Wars iconography of like Jango Fett, I don't really enjoy it. Actually, I find it irritating. I mean, insofar as all the Rise of Skywalker has going for it is, oh, you still like Rey and Kylo Ren and Poe Dameron and Finn, right? And it's just like, I like them, but they're just doing uninteresting, boring, kind of bland things in Rise of Skywalker. And then next, I think I'm going to put... I think I'll go for Rogue One next. It's a fun Star Wars bash, but very fan fiction-y, and it's like the best fan film ever made in a way in terms of production values, right? Best Star Wars fan film, that is for sure. I'll probably give it to Last Jedi next. When it works, but a third of it's just kind of bad, unfortunately. Wish it weren't. Force Awakens is less ambitious, but it's more streamlined. The Star Wars iconography is just too much fun. It's so satiating to just view, and just the symmetry of it all. It just feeling like a continuation of the original trilogy. So it's just so potently fun in my opinion, perspective. Next, I'm gonna go with The Phantom Menace. If it weren't for, even if it weren't for Jar Jar Binks, Jake Lloyd, the too much focus on Tatooine and the kid. Other than that, film's great. Fuck it. I'm going to put Return of the Jedi next. It's too much time. It just tries to wrap up the story too much rather than being an original, interesting event. And frankly, the Ewoks are very annoying. And also, I think there's a bit too much in the way of... Well, obviously, I don't like the... Well, I think it neuters Darth Vader a tiny bit. I'm not the biggest fan of, Luke and Darth Vader having conversations about, that... Oh, there's just one scene in the film, but, son, I haven't seen you in a while. I was like, I don't like that scene, honestly. I'm going to put Revenge of the Sith next. What a dynamic vision. Even though Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman are at the center of it, everything around it is just so glorious. I can't deny it. And next, I'm going to have to go for the original Star Wars film, for obvious reasons, and then Empire for being a superior version of the first Star Wars film, in my opinion. A finer cinematographic vision, more money was being filtered in to fund it. It's simply it's a finer space opera, it's a finer narrative, it's a finer piece of character development / arc weaving. I don't think it's a huge leap from the first, but I do find it, some people call it, I was leagues better than the first one. We'll go maybe a half league better than the first one, or a 1 league, I'm going to use nautical terms for some reason, just because we like Jules Verne, I guess. If we're going to use that, yeah, maybe 1 league max better than the original Star Wars. I'll say that much. Yeah, my ranking there. So this might be the most contentious upload FOTD in the acknowledging our discontent history, but that's all well and fine. I still acknowledge the issues with this film, although I would stress that we are being pedantic after a while and maybe a little bit orthodox and kind of, dare I say, a tiny bit lazy when assessing Phantom Menace in the context of Star Wars. Maybe a little. In any case, stay well as you have ever been. I hope you have the finest day you have ever imagined.